Hello, welcome to this week's Parsha Themes Shir on Parsha Korach. This is for the Refuah Shalem of Bimheira of Moshe, Shimon ben Leah Esther Chaya. So Korach, who was he? The Pasuk says, Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahas ben Levi, and Korach took. Korach was the first cousin of Moshe and Aaron. He was an intelligent and learned person. However, he was also jealous, a rebel, and strove to acquire power to satisfy his lust for honor. He posed as the champion of the masses, claiming to be a man of the people and to be striving for social equality and justice. This was a smokescreen for his malevolent plan to usurp Moshe from the leadership of Klal Israel, to massage his own ego. Everything that Korach himself was, he projected onto Moshe, his cousin, suggesting that Moshe had usurped power for himself as leader and for his brother Aaron as the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. Thus, the prominent positions were occupied by his uncle Amram's sons, and another of his gripes, that Elitzaphan, the son of Uziel, another of his cousins, was put in charge of the Kohathite family to oversee and organize the work of the Levium. He believed that his own father Yitzhar, the second son of Kahas, was a righteous man whose family was also destined for greatness. Partly, this was based on a divine revelation he experienced, that some of his descendants would occupy important positions. However, he didn't realize that this described the situation in the nation many generations later, and did not apply to him himself. So what were Korach's tactics? Again, the Pasuk says, V'yikach Korach, and Korach took. What exactly did he take? The verse contains no object. Rashi, together with Onkelos, explains, Lakach es hatzmo letzad echad. He took himself to one side. In other words, he first decided who his enemy was, then chose the arguments to disparage and dispute him. Machlokes, fighting and strife, does not begin with the issue itself, with the actual point of controversy. It starts with the decision to move to one side, to see oneself as being on a different side, and to view others as adversaries and opponents. Whatever issues arise, whatever disagreements people have, can be effectively resolved if the two parties feel they are on the same side, on the same team. But once the decision is made to view themselves as standing on two different sides, reconciliation becomes all but impossible. The key is to remember that we are all on the same side, together on the same team. Once we begin with this basic premise, despite disagreements, we can have productive, healthy debates and work towards solutions that benefit our entire nation. The verse identifies Korach and reveals his ancestry, but only as far as Levi. Levi's father Yaakov Avinu isn't mentioned, as it would have demeaned him to be associated with Korach. This accorded with Yaakov's request on his deathbed when he prayed that his name shouldn't be associated with the assembly of Korach, whose antics he had foreseen through prophecy. Korach questioned, Rav lechem, ki kol ha'eda kulam kadoshim, umadua tisnasu. It is too much for you, for the entire assembly is holy, and why do you raise yourselves over everyone else? He said to Moshe. In other words, he was saying that Moshe took the Malchus, the kingship and the leadership, and why did you also make Aaron your brother the Kohen Gadol, the high priest? This is nothing other than nepotism, he claimed. So what was Korach's error and what drove him? The philosophy espoused by Korach was self-serving and flawed. He claimed that all the people were equally holy. Therefore, who are you and why do you raise yourselves over everyone else? You took the Malchus, the kingship. Why did you also make Aaron your brother, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest? The Torah states several times that we are a holy nation, consisting of holy people. For example, Kadoshim to you. You, the entire nation, should be holy. However, the corollary that Korach put forward, that therefore anyone could be promoted to high positions in the hierarchy of the nation, was false. Korach schemed to demonstrate the veracity of his claim. The Midrash recounts how he had robes made of pure techeles for his followers, and wearing them appeared before Moshe. The law is that 4-cornered garments require tzitzit, tassels, on each corner, comprised of white strings, and also a single one consisting of techeles, which is blue, representing the holy and spiritual. Korach asked Moshe, do these robes of pure techeles also require a string of techeles? He implied that if the whole nation was holy, then why were additional holy people required to lead them? Moshe answered, however, that even these robes of pure techeles did require a techeles string, together with the white ones. Moshe was indicating, without tzitzit, a blue robe is just a robe, not a holy garment. Similarly, without leadership, the Jewish people is just a people, an ethnic group, not a holy nation. HaShem's plan was clear. Leaders were required, even for a holy nation. But these leadership roles had to be earned on merit. It is a basic principle applying to the Jewish nation that there are different roles for different individuals. Not everyone can be or is supposed to be the leader, just as not everyone can be a Kohen. Korach exploited his grievance in his drive for kavod, for honor and glory. He had a mistaken view of leadership. Leadership is not about status, but rather function. Even our leaders are called on to be subservient as God's servants. He thought Moshe and Aaron set themselves above the congregation without being divinely appointed. In this, he was completely mistaken. Now, dangerous human drives and the dangers of holiness. The sages explain that kina, taiva, and kavod, that envy, lust, and the desire for honor removes a person from the world. In other words, they detract from a person's spiritual and moral standing. That's from Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers. Korach's collapse teaches us that if we are not grounded adequately by humility, then closeness to holiness can actually be dangerous. Now Moshe requests a miracle. He said in response to Korach, HaShem, please kill them in a way no one has died until now. In other words, by the earth swallowing them up. That's what Moshe requested of God. This demonstrates the incredible closeness Moshe had with God, that he could even request that he perform for him a personal miracle, and in very short order. But in the past, Moshe had always prayed to HaShem to save those of the nation who had sinned. Why doesn't Moshe plead for Korach and his cohorts as he had in the past? The answer is that, previously, the people's errors were driven by lusts and temptations, but this time was different. Korach's rebellion would have undermined everything, including the structure of the nation, and would have thrown into doubt the very validity of the Torah itself. If Moshe had no credibility, then the whole Torah, which he had received through his unmatched prophecy, has no basis. Now, Korach's timing. Korach and his followers comprised a type of populist movement. They claimed alone to be the true voice of the public. But Aaron was appointed Kohen Gadol a long time previously, so why did Korach decide to act only now? Because Korach knew he wouldn't have been successful straight after the revelation at Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, when the people's emunah, their faith, was strong. Now, however, after the incident with the spies and the resultant decree of wandering in the Midbar, in the desert, for nearly 40 years, the people felt they had nothing to lose. They had a general discontent. The warning for us is to stay away from people or movements who demonize their opponents. Now, true leadership qualities. Moshe said, the Torah says, Vayipol al ponov, and he, Moshe, fell on his face. Why, after hearing their complaint, did Moshe fall on his face? First, it was to show his humility, and to indicate that it wasn't due to any kind of pride or arrogance that he had been appointed the leader. On hearing Korach's accusation, Moshe did not immediately lash out in anger. He humbly lowered his head. His initial reaction was to honestly ask himself whether perhaps there was some kernel of truth to Korach's accusations. Is there merit to the message? Is there something to learn from it? Perhaps he did assume too much authority for himself. Perhaps he was driven by ego. Perhaps there was some nepotism involved in his appointing his brother as Kohen Gadol. Of course, none of this was true, and Moshe quickly recognized that none of it was true, but only after initially lowering his head and giving serious thought to what Korach said. A real leader does not instinctively dismiss criticism. He doesn't have to necessarily agree with his detractors, and he should of course stubbornly adhere to his values and principles even in the face of harsh criticism and ridicule. But when he or his decisions are criticized, he should give honest, careful consideration to the criticism. Perhaps the policy decision in question was misguided or made without thinking it through properly. Maybe a mistake was made. If we are going to grow and improve, we need to go through this uncomfortable process of questioning ourselves, acknowledging the possibility that we might have gotten it wrong, and honestly scrutinizing our words, actions, and decisions. Moshe then got up and invited Korach and his followers to offer incense the next day together with Aaron in order to determine whom HaShem had chosen to serve as Kohen Gadol, as the high priest. Now Moshe, as compared to Korach, humility compared to pride and ego. Korach was wise, wealthy, and had been given an honorable role in carrying the holy vessels of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Yet he was driven by a hunger for power and desire for honor, fueled by his great ego, and he was possessed by irrational jealousy. Midrash Rabbah says, whoever pursues honor, honor flees from him. Whoever flees from honor, honor pursues him. There is a constant struggle between ego and selflessness, between self-promotion and divine service. Moshe's absolute humility contrasted completely with Korach's absolute arrogance, the former's spiritual submission to the latter's spiritual ambition. Korach wanted control, whereas Moshe just wanted what was best for the nation, for whose welfare he felt obligated. Korach and friends, and all their families and wealth, were miraculously swallowed up by the earth as punishment. Now, what really is Anavah? We've spoken several times about Anavah, humility, before, but we've never investigated it in depth. So Anavah, humility, is not meekness, low self-esteem, or a sense of unworthiness. We don't turn the cheek, as some of our co-religionists recommend. Genuine humility does not entail self-effacement, nor does it mean being a doormat to be stepped on by others, or even thinking less of oneself. Rather, it is self-knowledge in proportion to HaShem's greatness. True humility comes from knowing that everything we have, including all of our abilities and talents, comes entirely as a gift from HaShem, and also that we have been given by the Creator the responsibility to use all of them in His service. Moshe told Korach, Hamuat mikem, is it not enough for you to be a Levi? But wouldn't Hamuat lachem be more grammatically correct? Rather, the verse is very specific and indicates that which you feel less than others, Hamuat, that you feel small, Korach, is because you think everything is mikem, from you, and not from HaShem. Anavah, humility, means recognizing that we are not the center of the world, that there is something greater than ourselves. In terms of HaShem himself, we learn that his humility is an expression of his greatness. HaShem cloaked himself in humility in order to descend and speak to mankind at Mount Sinai, says the Zohar. So, like God's other traits, which we must strive to occupy, to copy and mirror, so also it is with humility. Just as he is humble, so must we strive to be humble. HaShem is the master of humility. Thus, greatness and humility are not opposites. The Gemara in Megillah states, Wherever you find the greatness of the Holy One, of God, there you also find his humility. And it is stated in Isaiah the prophet, I dwell in holiness, but I am with the broken and humble of spirit. Thus, HaShem himself defines his greatness as his closeness to the lowly. He is high, but still looks upon the lowly. Humility is the antidote to pride. Humility means not feeling the need to be right all the time in what we say. We should accept advice and criticism and consider the views of our opponents, as Moshe did with Yisro, his father-in-law, where he appointed the judges as Yisro advised him. Moshe, on more than one occasion, pleads with God for the forgiveness and survival of the nation, exclaiming, if you do not forgive them, then wipe out me and my name from the entire Torah. Moshe was aware of his greatness. Despite HaShem writing about him that he was the humblest man on earth, it didn't swell Moshe's pride at all. The truth is that, back at the burning bush, Moshe tried to escape from the role of leader, whereas Korach ran after power and glory. Many verses in Tanakh, in the Torah and the prophets and the writings, tell us about the importance of humility. He leads the humble in the just way and teaches the humble his way, it says in Psalms, that being just one of many. Moshe's great humility explains the awesome level of prophecy he was able to attain. He was thereby able to make himself into an absolutely pure vessel to receive God's Torah and wisdom. True greatness is when you make yourself small enough for God to dwell within you. Someone humble is at peace. Humility attracts divine closeness, whereas arrogance and pride drives away the divine presence. Pride is based on the illusion of ego standing for edging God out, and isolates the soul from truth. A proud person sees himself as independent and as having no need for God. The prophet Zephaniah states, seek humility, perhaps you will be sheltered on the day of judgment. In other words, only those who are humble will possibly merit protection at the end of days. Thus, humility is the key to surviving judgment at the end of days. The truly humble never presume they will be saved because they serve out of love rather than a feeling of entitlement. There are 3 stages according to the Malbim that a person must navigate. First of all, seeking HaShem, spiritual connection and righteousness. Secondly, living with honesty, integrity and fairness, which all naturally flow from emunah, faith, and bitachon, trust in God. And finally, to seek out, internalize and live with true humility by emptying oneself of ego. Now, Korach and boundaries, learning from the sun. So, the words that Moshe stated in response to Korach's complaint was, Boker v'yodeh HaShem. When morning comes, HaShem will show. After being confronted by Korach and his followers, who demanded the rights to the kahuna, the priesthood, Moshe decided to conduct a test. He told them to come the next morning to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, with ketores incense, which they would offer together with Aaron, and HaShem would accept the offering of the one chosen to serve as the Kohen. Tragically, the 250 men who challenged Moshe all perished the next morning while offering their ketores. But that was the answer of HaShem, that Aaron and Moshe had been appointed according to the divine will, and nothing else. Rashi, citing the Midrash, finds significance in the fact that Moshe invited Korach and his followers to bring incense specifically in the morning. Moshe was telling Korach, the Almighty divided his world with boundaries. Can you turn morning into night? Only by doing such could you cancel this appointment by God of Aaron to the position of Kohen Gadol. HaShem created boundaries between people just as he created boundaries in nature. Just as the sun cannot shine at night, a non-Kohen cannot become a Kohen. Why did Moshe give this specific analogy to day and night? Why was this the example he chose of boundaries that cannot be crossed? The Gemara in Shabbos famously teaches about those who are insulted but do not insult, who hear their disgrace but do not respond. The Gemara applies to such people the promise made in the Pasuk, the verse in Sefer Shoftim, Judges, and those who love him are like the sun in its might. A person who is able to absorb insults, who ignores the smears that people spread about him, is likened to the sun. The Gemara elsewhere in Chulin tells that the sun and moon were originally created equal in size until the moon protested, coming before God and claiming, "Two kings cannot serve with the same crown." The moon did not want to share its stature with the sun and petitioned God to make the sun smaller. HaShem responded by making the moon smaller instead. The sun, which remained silent in the face of the moon's petty argument, was allowed to shine brightly. Likewise, those who do not respond to insults, who just move on without striking back, are rewarded with the light of success. Those who insult and smear others are punished like the moon. They become small and disgraced, whereas those with the dignity and self-control to remain silent in the face of insult and humiliation end up shining brightly. This was Moshe's message to Korach and his followers. They thought they could win by challenging Moshe and Aaron, by belittling them, by accusing them of selfishness and egotism. Moshe therefore noted the example of the sun and the moon, how the sun forever shines brightly, whereas the moon is very small and dim. Those who hurl insults, who try to besmirch and smear people's characters, end up small like the moon. Conversely, those who know how to keep silent, how to absorb the insults without responding, are promised to emerge as mighty and grand as the sun. Yisurin, which means suffering and affliction, comes in many different forms, one of which is insults. If a person is spoken to in an offensive manner, if people are spreading unflattering information about him, this form of Yisurin he is experiencing is taking the place of far worse Yisurin, suffering, such as illness or financial struggles. One of the sages says that a person who suffers embarrassment should rejoice that this is the suffering he is enduring, that he is being spared other calamities by going through this unpleasant experience. And if he remains silent without firing back, then he is promised that he will succeed and shine far brighter than his detractors who are trying to take him down. Now finally, our role and social responsibility. In these current times of difficulty for Jews around the world and for Israel, to partner with God to help him bring truth to the world. That is our role and social responsibility. We must speak up for Israel, for Jews, to counter the lies, blood libels, and evil with truth, goodness, and Torah, wherever and whenever we can, be it marches, emailing, social media, in terms of liking or sharing posts, lobbying politicians and influencers, discussing with friends and others, informing with the facts, explaining the unparalleled morality of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, explaining our history, heritage, and incomparable contributions to the modern world. We must take a firm stand, like Moshe versus Korach, not stand by silently as enablers and allow this evil to promulgate. Thank you for watching the Parsha Shir this week. Please join us for the next one next week. All the best. Shalom.